Welcome to another edition of Papa's Perspective, part of the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Bob's Discount Furniture. Talking about the Giants on the road against Washington in 1986. They were called the Redskins. And the Giants in Washington had a heck of a rivalry. And we're joined by Bart Oates, who's part of that Giants Super Bowl team in 1986. And Bart, thank you first for joining us here on the podcast. And
my pleasure, Bob.
Let's go back in time a little bit here. 1986, you and the Giants in Washington had this heated rivalry. You had beaten them at home on Monday Night Football, and you went through this wild stretch. You had the Bobby Johnson catch in Minnesota and the comeback win. You had the win at Giants Stadium against the Broncos with George Martin getting the tip and the pick six. And then the Bavaro game, you go out to San Francisco, and you beat the Niners 21-17. So now you're going down to RFK Stadium. You're playing Washington. Both teams come into the game at 11-2, and this pretty much is whoever wins this game wins the division. What was it like going down to play at RFK Stadium during that era?
We loved playing down there. It was just, I loved the environment. I loved the fans. I thought the great fans, very vocal, but they were not obnoxious, as like some of the other fans in our division might have been. And it was it was a grass field. It was soft compared to what we had at the time and at the Meadowlands Stadium, and so it was just a comfortable environment. It was something we really enjoyed playing there. We played there well.
Let's talk a little bit about the challenge that you guys faced as an offensive line. I mean, they had Charles Mann and they had, Dexter Manley and Dave Butts. I mean, they had a heck of a defense. Joe Gibbs' team did, and it was always a battle. What were some of the keys to playing against that Washington team?
It was the front. I mean, they had, their linebackers were serviceable, but they weren't all-stars at the time. Good guys. Neil Okowitz was the middle linebacker, smart, cagey, but not somebody you would say, hey, he's going to dominate a game. But those guys up front, Daryl Grant and then Butts in the middle, they were just two really good defensive tackles. And those defensive ends with Mann and Manley were just tremendously productive. And so it was those, our focus was really on those front four guys. And then, they didn't do a lot of blitzing because they tended to get a lot of pressure just with those four guys. They didn't do a lot of twisting and stunts. They just went man up on us and said 4-on-5 and felt that they could win at that. Of course, you had Darrell Green as the first ballot Hall of Famer, and then other really good defensive backs. So they really didn't need to do much other than just play straight up footballs. So we knew what they were going to do. They'd shift around a little bit in the middle and change angles, but it wasn't a real complex, not something you'd find with Bears, for instance, when they have 46 or some of these other guys who run the overs and unders. So we knew what we had. We knew what we were going to get. And it was just a matter of lining up and executing.
You guys matched up well against them, too, because you had a lot of success against Washington, despite the fact that they had a really good team and would go on to win the Super Bowl the following year. But as you say in boxing, sometimes styles make fights. Did you guys feel when you stepped on the field with them, with all the respect that you had for them as a team, but that you had the upper hand with them?
Oh, yeah. No question. Yes. Yeah, we thought we matched up well with them. Our defense matched up really well against their offense. And they were very productive offense, an offense that threw the ball. They could run the ball well, good offensive line, right? I mean, guys that were all Pro Bowl players. So it was a team that, from our defense, which was a bunch of Pro Bowl players, that was the strength of our team. What we did is we were not a team that was going to go out there, particularly offensively, that we were just going to run the score up. We weren't a scoring team. That's not what we did. We were a team that we managed the game. We'd come off and, Bill's philosophy was just don't lose the game. We'd come after a turnover, we'd run over this, come over the sidelines. Bill would gather us all together and you'd say, guys, I don't need you to win the game. Just don't lose it for me. And that was his, but it made sense, right? It was, we knew we had a good kicking game with Raul and Sean Landetta. punting and kicking. Raul, that game was perfect. 1 field goal, 3 PATs. Sean punted 6 times, which is quite a bit. But it's because we had 1 turnover with the first possession, and that was it. That was the only turnover we had. And then we had a sack, I think maybe the second possession, and that was the only sack and turnover. And so for most of the game, they didn't get pressure on Phil. We didn't run the ball particularly well, but that's not, we knew we weren't. I mean, they played up pretty tight, and that was a good front seven. So we started out throwing the ball. I mean, here we were a running team, and I think we had the first 4 or 5 plays in a row were passing plays. Which was, I mean, I remember he'd keep calling passing plays. He'd call in the huddle. I'm like, we don't do this. Who's calling these plays? Like, Parcells must not be listening.
He let Earhart go that day.
Yeah.
But wasn't that the brilliance of your team, especially that 86 team, was your team's ability to adapt as needed? I mean, Joe didn't run for a lot of yards that game, but there was a balance with the 22 runs. And even though you didn't get the yards per carry you wanted, it set up Phil to be able to throw the ball to Bavaro for over 100 yards, and McConkey to have that clutch touchdown catch to kind of put the game away. But you guys did what you needed to do that week to win the game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that was it. We were not a team, like I said, you just mentioned all those games in Minnesota and San Francisco, right? We won, but that 11-2 record, there was not a lot of difference in points scored and points against, because we didn't just run the score up. It wasn't who we were. We had a 7-point lead going into the fourth quarter. We were just going to, Bill was saying, nobody's going to score against my defense. So if I'm up 7, I don't need to throw the ball and risk it. Let's just play solid. Let's run the ball. And if we have to punt the ball, we'll punt it. And then we'll play field position. Somebody's not driving down the field. They may kick a field goal, but they're not going to score a touchdown. And you know what? Philosophy worked really well. We were built for that.
What about the sort of the environment as that game is wrapping up? I know all of your teammates and Parcells has always talked about, the silence in RFK Stadium, because I remember being in that building while it was still in existence, and how it would shake, and how the stands would actually move, and they could be loud, and they would sing the song, and they had the hogs and all that other stuff. But the silence at the end of the game, what was your memory of that walking off the field?
It's, that is the best feeling when you're at a place like that, when you're at an opponent's home field and you don't hear the screaming, you don't hear the applause. It's just this murmuring, almost a stupor, if you will, that, the fans are going like, how did this happen? They were 11-2 as well. I mean, they were having a great year and had a great year, other than, they were at that point, they were 11-3, and 2 of those losses came against the Giants after that game. So it really was that quality team, and they just weren't used to losing, particularly in that fashion.
So now you got the upper hand, you got the sweep on them. You've got 2 home games coming up. You got St. Louis is coming into the building, and then you're going to finish the season off with the Packers, where you actually did score 55 points in that game. What was the message from Parcells in the locker room afterwards, though? Was it to the effect of, we still haven't accomplished what we need to accomplish?
We haven't done anything, right? Beating the Redskins necessary, but it didn't finish it. It didn't help us get to where we want to go. We knew after that 85 year that, we were a good team. We had players all throughout the team in every position that could play. And that, we knew what we wanted. We not just, we wanted to win the conference and win the Super Bowl. But initially it was really about the conference. That was where our focus really was. Let's win the conference. That's what we have to do. And then when we get invited to the Super Bowl, we'll worry about that at that point. But win the conference. And this was a step towards that, but it didn't accomplish it.
So just keeping it on the Washington thread, obviously you and Washington were the 2 best teams in the NFC that year, along with San Francisco. But you get Washington in Giant Stadium for the NFC Championship game. People always say it's hard to beat a team 3 times in one season. I'm guessing that thought never even crossed your mind that it's hard because you felt like you owned them a little bit, didn't you?
No, no, Parcells would never let that happen. There was no ownership there. It was like, he preached that like, guys, it never happens. Nobody ever beats a team 3 times. And if you relax in the, just a little bit, these guys, and we knew they were good. Listen, we beat them, but we didn't beat them by much. And it was a dogfight. Our defense, I think in that game, in December, that was what we have 6 interceptions. Defense just, and we still only beat them by 10 points. So it was, it was with 6 interceptions. You think a team throws 6 interceptions, you should beat them by 30 points. So we knew that. Listen, we had to play our best when we faced them in the conference championship.
And you got them at home.
Yeah.
Brutal weather conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Landeta, kind of a great vindication for him, considering what had happened the year before in Chicago, which a lot of people forget that even though you lost to the Bears and the score was what it was, that game was a lot closer than I think people remember the Chicago game. You guys had chances in that 85 game a little bit.
What?
Yeah, you did.
You must be talking to Phil because Phil thinks that too. And I'm like, you must be on.
He did brainwash me a little bit on that.
Oh my goodness, that game. Listen, offensively, I'll just tell you up front, there was no way They dominated us. They kicked our fannies. They had a better scheme than us. I mean, there was no way in the world. I don't. What Phil's thinking when he thinks it was a close game. I just.
He's brainwashed me.
Give me a break.
I got to talk to you more. All right, but for Landeta,
yes,
vindication because he had a Pro Bowl game in that NFC Championship game.
He hit it. So I was the snapper. I was the punt snapper too, in field goals. And so so for me, I loved when he was punting into the wind because that meant I was snapping with the wind.
With the wind.
So, but he just, and it was keeping it low and keeping a tight spiral. And you do that, it'll cut through the wind and actually it even helps with that wind in a tight spiral. It'll actually hold it up. And so he was really tight that game.
And you guys are able to beat him. You shut him out. It wasn't easy, but you kind of played your brand of football, right? You played complementary football. Used your run game, used your special teams, and then with Lawrence Taylor and company, you're not losing.
Play field position. Don't turn the ball over. We've got a great defense. Teams are not going to run it down the field on us. I mean, we're talking about offenses, the Redskins, the 49ers. Nobody did that against our defense. It didn't matter. We were too well prepared and we had too many good players. So we knew that was going to happen. So offensively, it was just, put your blinders on, do your job. Don't, suck up your ego. You're not going to go out there and run the ball and Sims isn't. The only time Sims passed the ball for 500 yards, we lost the game, right, to the Bengals in '85. So we're not going to throw the ball. Just don't turn it over and play that field position, and we will win. And that that era that really happened.
So as you reflect back on your career, and you think about your time as a Giant, and Giants fans obviously can't stand the teams in the division. You must have some warm memories about Washington because you beat them a whole heck of a lot.
Yes, I said I love going down to Washington. My in-laws were living down there. My father-in-law was working in Congress as a legislative aide, and so we would go down there. I got to see visit some family, and so we would go down there quite a bit anyway. So, and I loved the whole environment, Washington environment. And, like I said, we loved the field. We loved the environment. We loved the fans. We loved it when they were noisy. We loved it, especially when they were kind of silent. So it was a good feeling. And we did, like I said, we did well down there.
And then just one final question, as you kind of spin it forward to today's game. If you look at like the trend from last season with you being an offensive lineman, and having to figure out all these fronts and making the calls and working with Phil and deciphering all that, all the rules are skewed for passing, and we see all these explosive passing numbers. But did you like the trend that we saw last season in the NFL a little bit, where teams that did commit to the run had a lot of success? And I think last year, for the first time in a long time, over the course of the season, we had more teams have 200 or more yard rushing games than we had in like the previous 8 years combined, where teams are starting to look at it and say, hey, if they're going to go small and fast and speed to cover everybody, let's go big and pound the heck out of them.
Yeah, smaller guys, so they can get up the field, pressure on the quarterback, coverage, run the ball. It's a patient game, and that's where Parcells' brilliance came in. He was a patient coach. He looked at it in a full game context, and instead of saying, we just got to score points. If you're in a situation, don't risk it. Get field position, play the field position, and when you have a team like we had, it worked. It worked really well.
Bart, we want to thank you for a couple minutes taking us down memory lane, especially to 1986 and the Giant-Washington rivalry, which was a fun time for Giants fans, which helped give birth to that first ever Super Bowl championship for the franchise. We appreciate a couple of minutes, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure, Bob. Thank you.
That's Bart Oates reminiscing about the Giants in Washington, 1986, clinching the NFC East, on this edition of Papa's Perspective, part of the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Bob's Discount Furniture.